Hello, my name is Tia, also known as Costume Fiend because I'm both evil and excessively fond of dressing up. I feel these last few weeks I've been having trouble focusing, so luckily for me, I've got something new to give my attention to. My sister and I went to see the movie Sinners last week, and we both really enjoyed it, as apparently did a lot of people. I remember last year when I was making my videos on vampires, and I think I mentioned in at least one of them that my interest in vampires has had its ebbs and flows. Most of my favorite vampire pieces of media aren't particularly deep, although that doesn't mean you can't pull anything of value from them, but stuff like Fright Night and What We Do in the Shadows aren't really trying to teach you anything necessarily. When I first heard about Sinners, I was immediately intrigued by the idea of Ryan Coogler making a vampire movie, in part because it was an original story, and in part because Ryan Coogler tends to do black women justice in his work. Sinners, I think, exists in that fun intersection of supernatural meets period drama, with plenty of things to say about race, class, gender, you name it. The same way I sort of prefer murder mysteries when they're period pieces, there is something a little bit more fun to me when characters can't just Google what is a vampire. There's a lot to dissect, and I definitely want to watch it again, but for today, based purely on my initial thoughts, I just wanted to ramble a bit. I decided to just divide this up into three sections. The first is on the twins, the second is on Annie and Mary, and the third is on Sammy. None of this will make any sense to you if you haven't watched the movie, so if you don't want spoilers, I'd stop here. Most of the time I talk about older things, so I almost never have to give a spoilers heads up, but since Sinners is still in theaters, it's better safe than sorry. If you've watched the movie or you just don't care about spoilers, you can enjoy these somewhat cohesive thoughts. Like I said, I'm going to start with talking about the twins. On a non-story note, it was kind of funny to go into this knowing that Michael B. Jordan was playing dual roles when in real life identical twins tend to have at least one visual cue that sets them apart from their sibling. In the context of the story, though, I think the main thing that sets Smoke and Stack apart is their wardrobe and their mannerisms. And I think a part of this was because prior to the events of the film, they were allegedly pretending to be one person, which means they needed to have the same haircut and facial hair. I'd also heard that the film was given a relatively short amount of time to wrap everything up, so I'm sure on a meta note, it was also certainly easier to have them do that rather than something like Parent Trap, where, like Lindsay Lohan's characters have slightly different features at the beginning before they switch. Either way, I'm not mad at it, and I think Michael B. Jordan did a good job at making them feel like separate people. Personally, I'm not here to pick any favorites, although the fact that there's even any conversation about which twin was more attractive should tell you that yes, personality does play a role in people's interest in a person. That being said, I do prefer people who are dependable, and leaving to do crimes in Chicago aside, Smoke was definitely that guy. Him being the older twin also probably gets me a little because of my strong older sibling bias. I'll get to this more when I talk about the ladies, but Smoke being the grounded one made for a great pairing with Annie, who was on the more spiritual side, but still, earthy as she was described. The fact that they had history was immediately apparent in their first scene together, and very much the protective older sibling till the very end. Before joining his wife and daughter on the other side, Smoke takes care of his brother one more time, protects his younger cousin, and takes out a whole bunch of Klansmen. Not a bad way to go. Now, on the flip side, we have Stack, who I knew was going to be the troublemaker the minute I saw him in that red hat. Ryan wasn't really going for subtlety here, and I actually kind of appreciated that. We're set up for the twins' separate arcs immediately, and even though I prefer dependable people in real life, I'm not immune to fictional bad boys every once in a blue moon. Stack, in contrast to his brother, who has chosen a wife that's a grounding and steady presence, decided to play life on hard mode and develop feelings for Mary, who is white passing and not particularly shy. Ever the smooth talker, it was kind of inevitable, like I said, that he'd be the one to turn into a vampire. What I didn't expect, though, was for him to not only make it to the end, but for him to also still be around 60 years later after the events of the main story. I said this in a drawing I made of him and Mary, but a part of me thinks that maybe some of what Remick, our main antagonist, said still lingered, and that Stack wanted to see if America would ever grow and change. Alas, even in the 90s, there was still plenty of anti-blackness to go around. What I overall liked about Stack as a character was that in spite of the bravado, there was still a caring person in there, and without Remick fogging up his brain, he respected his brother's final request to leave their cousin alone. And honestly, speaking of that last fight between brothers, I'm still kind of not over the fact that Smoke spent his whole life protecting Stack and even killed their father for beating him up, only for one of their final moments together involve him beating Stack up. Sorry if that didn't occur to you till just now, but also I'm not. We have to spread the pain around. Moving on, though, it was a little bit hard to avoid talking about Annie and Mary when talking about the twins, because while I think they're both more than just love interests, they do tell you something about each of the brothers, as one's choice and partner often does. The two of them might be the characters that lingered with me the most for a few different reasons. One reason for that is definitely because I'm rather ambiguous looking as a black person, and even though, unlike Mary/Haley, both my parents are also black, as well as my grandparents, I definitely related to her feeling like an other in a way that grants you privilege but also prevents you from being able to fully share the black experience the way the other members of your family do. It's possible this is the bias, but I do think the movie did a good job at making her sympathetic while also avoiding making her the type of woman who puts her own oppression above her more marginalized peers. It's a very fine line to walk, but I don't think I've ever seen a character that looks the way she does and still want to be connected to blackness and clearly prefers the company of black people. Plus, whenever she and Annie stood next to each other, it kind of made me wonder if that's what it looks like to people when I'm standing next to one of my cousins. Speaking of Annie, she is absolutely the real MVP of the film, and she's the kind of person and character I enjoy seeing. The actress who plays her, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correct, Unmi Musaku, is gorgeous, and I feel like I first saw her in the HBO show Lovecraft Country. She impressed me a lot in there, and is often the case when black actresses that are new to me enter my field of vision. I immediately wanted to see her in more things. Unfortunately, as is also often the case, actresses that look like Musaku don't often get the chance to shine, but like I said earlier, Ryan Coogler is on my list of directors I trust to portray black women well, and I wasn't disappointed. In Annie's first scene, as I said when I talked about Smoke, both actors made the history between these two characters very easy to see. We immediately know that Annie is tough and has integrity, but she's also loving, very spiritual, and takes what she's given and tries to spin straw into gold, but in a grounded way. She grieves the loss of her daughter, but she's not wallowing in misery. She might be annoyed with her husband, but she still loves him and is a sexual being. We understand that last bit towards the end of her intro scene, and I'm still thinking about it for reasons not meant to be talked about in this ramble, so I'll move on. Expanding on what I meant about her taking what she's given, Annie's the first person to suspect the supernatural when shit starts to go down. And even though her first guess was that they were haints afoot, was incorrect, she didn't take long to realize they were dealing with vampires. She was able to be matter-of-fact and keep a cooler head, while Smoke, understandably having just lost a twin, was being overwhelmed by his emotions. Her knowledge came in handy, and she made sure that even in the end, she stayed true to her beliefs. Despite the fact that Annie dies, seeing her again in Smoke's final vision made it feel like her death wasn't just like a cheap throwaway when she could have lived. There was kind of like a point to it. One of the points of that sacrifice was to protect Sammy, who I'd argue is kind of the real protagonist/main character. The twins are front and center in much of the promotional material, but overall we start the movie with Sammy. His love and his gift for music both feeds his soul and brings the community together. It also attracts the attention of the vampires in the first place. Sammy, like Mary, has people in his life who love him and want to keep him safe by pushing him away and playing it safe. The two of them have only one interaction in the film that's just them only, from what I remember, and it brings up the topic of identity and family. The scene serves a few purposes, but his pointed question of what are you shows us that he's still relatively naive and hasn't seen much of the world. Ironically, Mary answers human, which was true at the time, but she is the first of the main group to become a vampire. Before shit hit the fan in one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and possibly now in film in general, everyone at the juke joint is the most connected they are in the whole story as they dance to Sammy's music, which also summons the ancestors as well as the energy of people from the future. Now, I'm not a great singer, and I wouldn't say I'm the best dancer, but good music really can feel that way, and even I can recognize it, even if I'm not as musically gifted. I think, like, when I was younger, I played clarinet and had piano lessons. That's about it. However, just because it's understandable to feel drawn to Sammy and his gift, the idea that it could exist in a hive mind creates a bit of a paradox. And then I was thinking about, like, what the difference was between that feeling of connection in the juke joint and the vampire hive mind. And To me, I guess it's a matter of the shared history between the people in the room and the singer, as well as the fact that Sammy's performance was his choice. He wanted to share his gift, and as I'm bringing this up, it also just occurred to me how funny it is that the vampire Remick, who needed to be invited in, wanted to bypass consent and take Sammy's gift at any cost. If Sammy had been forcibly turned, he would have lost the thing that made him talented in the first place, something I don't think Remick really thought through in his own desperate attempt at connection. Sammy escaping the vampire cult and then deciding to leave his father and his church behind, to me, were representative of Sammy owning his talent and deciding he was always going to play for himself. Regardless of what you think the movie is saying about Christianity, the moment Sammy hears his father say, and I'm paraphrasing, to give his gifts and stories to God, you can kind of tell that it clicks for him after having experienced vampires, that for him to be truly free and happy, he needed to keep the music. I mean, he spent all night protecting it, and being able to see him still playing 60-ish years later was beautiful to see. I wasn't sure how or when the movie would end, but the post-credit scene with Sammy really hammered that all home for me. Connection requires you to have something to, connect with. That's the difference between selling out or having your culture watered down and stolen from you. It might still be a decent quality, but it's just not the same. You're not likely to summon the ancestors with a paint by the numbers generic pop song. There's much more that you can take from this movie and many ways to expand on what I've just talked about, but perhaps for another time. I've definitely made some Tumblr posts. A lot of people are talking about this movie right now, and it's definitely for good reason. It's just nice to have something original, and even if it's not the most perfect movie in the world, it's just very refreshing. And again, I love the genre, and everyone did a great job in it. Yeah. So other than that, feel free to leave a like if you liked, subscribe for more Nerdy Rambling, and as always, have a good one.